You're listening to In Sickness, a podcast about caregiving with Allison Breininger and Justin Bima.
Good morning.
Good morning, Allison. How are you doing today?
You know what? I'm actually doing okay.
That's fantastic.
Dramatic pause. I know. You don't know how to respond to that, do you?
Right. It's you've had a kind of a lot going on for a while.
We
so
have.
it's good to hear.
So yeah, no, it feels actually okay at this moment. As Sean has his labs evened out and we're not exactly sure. We kind of think maybe it was like his kidneys from when they took a hit, that maybe then they messed up the labs for a bit, but they're back to normal.
Good.
And so we're just going to hope that they stay that way. And he's been feeling pretty okay. Yeah. So we're just sort of like, I'm enjoying sort of a slower pace this summer and like working less and being outside as much as I can and just kind of like trying to enjoy time with our girl before she goes off to college.
Right.
So it's been good.
Good.
I'm trying to not have like, what is it, FOMO about all the people who are traveling because we don't have any trips on the books now. And instead just be like, wow, it's summer.
Yeah.
It's slower. That's kind of the route I'm taking. So kind of just trying to enjoy this moment because, you know, who knows what's going to happen in 10 minutes. But
true.
Right now, doing okay.
Great. I'm really happy for you.
Thank you.
You have this calmer period.
Yes.
That you can just kind of, and it's happening during the summer when the weather's great and you can be out in your garden. And it's really great.
It is. It's really good. Yeah. How about you?
I mean, things are going good here. Sarah continues to be doing well after the surgery.
Good.
So that's been good. We've been walking a lot, which has been nice. Our blueberries are ripe, and that's always a big highlight every summer, going out and picking blueberries. So
I remember that.
Yesterday, it had been a couple days since we'd been out there, and we filled 3 bowls, like large bowls. So we picked a lot of blueberries. So
wow.
But now it's like we have to get out there every day to keep up with them.
Right.
But it's great. It's a nice, fun kind of annual thing that we do. So we're just kind of enjoying the summer. And we're kind of entering into like the nice weather window that we get in the Pacific Northwest for a few months. And so it's like you want to be home, you want to be enjoying it, you want to just sit on the deck and get the sun while we can.
Right. Yeah. I know when we logged on this morning, I was like, oh, I see sun shining through the window behind you. I'm like, it just looks different than it usually does. So I'm happy for you. You're getting sunshine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good. Well, look at us.
Yeah.
Let us just like take a moment to be like, and enjoy this moment of like both of our households are doing well at this moment.
Yeah.
We have those celebration bells. Have I told you about those?
Yes. We haven't talked about those in a long time.
Yeah.
But yeah, you've talked about those. Yeah.
Sean got me these it's like 3 little chimes. And when something good happens, we're supposed to like ring the bells. So they're not with me next to me here. But proverbially, we should ring the celebration bells because we got to enjoy these moments when both of our households are doing well.
For sure.
Well, today, so we're going to, we got an email. We love it when we get emails from, from our listeners. So we got an email recently from a listener who gave us a scenario and asked some questions that inspired us to have this conversation. And I asked him, I said, is it okay if we shared your questions? And he said, yes, absolutely. So we're doing this with his permission. But he was asking about advocacy, about the role of caregivers as advocates. And in his situation, it was that his girlfriend, I think, was the patient, and the nurse practitioner was not treating his girlfriend well. And was sort of gaslighting her, I think, a bit, and just sort of ignoring her and just really like downplaying it. And so his question was, what was his role? Yeah. First of all, he didn't know like what to do in that moment because he wasn't the patient. Secondly, it sounded like maybe it wasn't necessarily in his sort of comfort zone to be a person to sort of stand up and advocate. And so then, and also he was sort of like, this is a medical professional. So what's my role? And so just kind of, he wanted some background on that. And so I think we could maybe start with just sort of how I responded to him, but then also just talk about the huge role that advocacy plays in our lives as caregivers. How's that sound?
That sounds great.
Okay. So one thing I talked about with him, and I think that someday you and I should do a whole episode on this, is just the interesting relationship of being in a medical appointment as a caregiver with your loved one and who talks.
Yeah.
Right. Because that can be a whole thing. Right. And so so the first thing I said to him was, I think it would make sense for you to have a conversation with your partner around what does she want from you in those appointments?
Right. That's a great way to start. Yeah.
Was she wishing like, why is he not speaking up? Or if you had spoken up, would she have been like, hey, I can handle this myself? Or, and I think that's regardless of if this is a moment like his, where she wasn't being treated well, or if it's just a moment of like any kind of appointment. Right. So I think that's one good place to start. And again, we should have this bigger conversation someday because I think there's a lot of nuances there, but that's one piece. I think, and then another piece I mentioned to him is to never forget that we are the customers.
Yeah.
And I think that can feel we can forget that easily because these people have all these letters behind their name. And often, especially in the rare disease community, like you and I are in, like it can take a long time to like find a specialist and all of this. And so it can feel like they are definitely in a position of power in those scenarios. And it can feel like we just have to like nod and smile and give them our money and make a follow-up appointment and all of the things. And that can feel really hard when we're not being treated well or we're not getting the answers we want or whatever that is. And so I sort of reminded him of that just to sort of empower him to realize like in that moment, you can say like, I don't like the way that you're treating us. You can always say, can I see a charge nurse? You can always go to patient relations. There are things that you can do either in that moment or in the bigger picture.
Yeah.
To advocate for good care. So anyway, those are some of the things that I sort of said to him. Do you have anything that you would add in response to sort of his scenario?
Let me see. One, I think that personality type does play a big role in this. Like there are people like myself who just in general, like even if it was just me as the patient would have a hard time like really speaking up.
Yeah.
And so that can be a stretch. And I think just acknowledging that and not being overly hard on yourself for not speaking up during a single appointment. Like, okay, that's how this went. Have that conversation with the person you're caring for what they want, learn from it, move, how can we navigate this better in the future? So I think it's important not to like focus on, oh, I wish I did this. I wish I did this. I didn't do well. I failed here. Like, no, don't dwell on that. I think that's a good thing to keep in mind. And then going forward, it's tricky because it can be, you're in this realm where you're not the expert. I mean, certainly, and we can kind of talk about it because I think this ties in a little bit to like having some knowledge going into it, but like, we don't know, we don't have the answers. We don't know what's going on. It's kind of like, it could be like, if you're not a car person and you're going to the mechanic, like you're really entrusting them with like, I don't know what's going on here. And you're trusting what they're telling you. And certainly that's also there are, like people can feel like they're treated poorly because, they don't know what's wrong with their car. You know. And certainly, our lives are much more important than cars, but it's a similar dynamic. And
I think that's a great analogy.
Yeah. And I think that's something that people who aren't encountering medical stuff all the time maybe can relate to and kind of understand a little bit kind of what that can feel like. Yeah. So it's hard and it's frustrating. And I think also acknowledging just the, like, I wish people took this seriously piece and like just the not jumping to, I wish I did this. I wish I didn't do this, but like allowing yourself to be frustrated with the medical professional rather than what you did or didn't do.
Sure.
But yeah, I think not being the person that is as good as this, I don't feel like I have as many like, this is how you should handle it in the future.
Sure.
I think after you've had that conversation as far as kind of understanding with your person what your role is, and that may also not be something that you can do. Like if you're caring for an aging parent or something like that, there may not be the capacity to have that conversation. And I'm sure like that's also a dynamic where in appointments, you have to be doing a lot of advocating because you're more aware of the full picture and like they cognitively might not be doing as well. And so like, it's really on you to be doing a lot more. But I think being as prepared as you can going into appointments can be really helpful. Like one, kind of having an agenda for what you want out of this appointment, what you want to discuss. Certainly it's great to have that written down, whether that's on your phone or on a piece of paper going into it, a notebook, so that you can kind of like have a framework going in, so that you can look down and like if the doctor is like kind of feeling dismissive, you have a prompt right in front of you, like, okay, well, what you can ask that direct question and kind of get try to put things back on track.
Sure.
Is that
because I think even if the medical professional sees you pull out a list, they're like, whoa,
right? They take you a little more seriously,
right? So it doesn't, because I think advocacy doesn't have to always be that like we're being treated poorly necessarily, right? It can be partly just like the system, right? So maybe the system doesn't allow doctors to spend that much time in the appointment with us. So maybe they're starting to walk out the door.
Yeah.
And so how can you advocate in that moment to say, actually, we have some more questions that we need to ask you before you leave?
Yeah.
And so I think that you're right. Like having something written down is both shows them like, oh, I mean business and I've done my homework and I've got some things that we're going to do in this room together before you leave. But I think it also helps any personality type, but especially a personality type that might be more nervous in that moment to sort of ground yourself and to think, because in that moment, then suddenly you're like, I forgot all the questions. I don't know. Right. And so if you can, while you're in your clear thinking brain before the appointment, you can do all of those things, then I think that helps. Right. So I think that there's the in the appointment piece. Yeah. But I think there's so many other pieces as well, and including things like being in the waiting room.
Okay.
Right. Being in the waiting room and realizing we have been sitting here for a very long time.
Right.
You know, and advocating in that way to go to the desk and say, our appointment was at noon and it's 12:45. Can you please give me an update?
Yeah.
Or I know, and I feel like maybe you've done this as well way in the past, but I think that there have been times that Sean has been like so sick and then we've been at the doctor and I've had to go up and say, look, like we need a room. Like even if you're not ready to see us yet, like we need a room.
Yes.
So that he can lie down. And you had that as well, right? So things like that.
Yeah.
Or things like we've been sitting like, or they put you in a room and then you're like, we've been sitting here for an hour.
Yeah.
Where is the doctor?
Yeah.
Right. So there's logistical things like that as well that we as the caregiver, you know, often our person is just feeling lousy, like they can't pay attention, you know, they can't do that. And so then it ends up being on us to go find the person, you know, stick our head in the hallway and be like, where is everybody?
Right.
Right. So I think that's another piece is sort of around the logistics, or even around things like I've had moments where they've said, oh, well, our next appointment is in 4 months. Yeah. And I've had to say, no. You know, and again, we're like, they're the person with the computer and the calendar. And again, it's not that person's fault.
No.
But there are times that we have to say, that's not going to work. Like, who do I need to talk to? Or can we be on a waiting list? Or like, what do we need to do to make this, to be able to be seen sooner? Because that's not going to work for our person. Right. And so I think even reminding ourselves that we're allowed to say that. Now, I hate this because we're already tired and stretched. Yeah. And like, oh, I'm sorry that I'm telling people to like do more, right? And use extra energy that especially might go against your personality type. But we know that it's something we have to do. I remember that when you look up the word advocate or advocacy or advocating, it says to plead on someone's behalf. Right? Isn't that powerful? Like to plead on their behalf. And so I feel like that's what I can just picture so many scenarios where I have had to do that. And I hate that that's what I've had to do. Right. But it's sort of like, that's a huge role for us as caregivers, is this advocacy. And we find ourselves so often, whether it's in the medical system or with our family members or with our friends or with the insurance companies, right? That we are having to plead on their behalf. Right. So when you hear that definition, like, what is that? Does that pull up anything for you, or how does that strike you?
Well, to be honest, what that strikes me is it feels like a lot of pressure. Like that's a big responsibility. Yeah. And that maybe that's part of my personality type, but that there's a little bit of like, oh man, that's a lot for me to be doing. And I think certainly that can feel like a big piece of caregiving that can feel overwhelming, is like figuring out what your role is in interacting with the medical system, with your person, feeling out of your depth there, feeling just like that's a lot to take on. And yeah, like you said, we hate telling caregivers or feeling like we're telling them to do more work.
Yeah.
But I think it's an area where getting some knowledge, getting prepared, doing your homework, doing some research, can make a big difference. Because certainly, like with Sarah's POTS, like that was something that I came across as like, this is a thing that people with like some of her symptoms often have. These are kind of some of the parameters that indicate that. So like for a couple weeks, we took data at home. I made the graphs. We talked about my graphs a long time ago, and like brought that in to an appointment. Like, this is what we think is going on. Here's what we've got here. And that was well received. And we started, getting some treatment options for that. And then still with her POTS, like when those things weren't doing well, like seeing that there are people who have this fairly severely, that like taking daily like IV infusions was something that was helpful. And so like we brought that and pushed for that, and they went along with that and gave her a central line.
Yeah.
Which is
right.
Like, that was not something that they were like, she needs to do this. That was something like, yeah, we think this is what we want.
Right.
And thankfully we had a provider who was like, I will go along with you on this, and we'll do this and see what happens.
Yeah.
But that bringing that information with you into the appointment can be, and like you said, when you pull out a list, they take you a little more seriously, I think, or they may.
Right. Well, I think what you just described is also like that sort of research piece of advocacy.
Yeah.
Right. That you had gone behind the scenes and you had looked and, what about this? And we saw this, and that we think it's this, you know what I mean? And so it's that piece too, which is sort of is different than like the in the moment, right? They're both.
Yeah.
And so they're both sort of components of being an advocate. But one is sort of the behind the scenes. It's even sort of like a few months ago, where I felt like every day I was calling a different nurse coordinator, and I was like, well, he needs these labs, and he needs this, and and have you talked to this person? And I think if I hadn't done any of that, like none of this would have happened, you know? And so there's so many components, that one is the research, one is the like in the moment, like this needs to happen. Like you are not treating us well.
Right.
One is sort of the coordinating.
Yeah. That's a big piece too.
Right. Of like, here's something that I think that they need, or here's this, or if you talk to making sure. And all of this is exhausting.
Yeah.
Because you think about, okay, what if you hadn't done that research? What if somebody hadn't stuck up for their person with a provider who was not treating them well? What if I had not coordinated all of those things? Like it's terrifying to think about the what ifs, because then I end up thinking about, well, what are the things I haven't done?
Yeah.
Right. What are the questions I haven't asked? What are the things I haven't advocated for? And would things have been better if they had? So I think, and I want to go back to for a second to when you said that sounds a little bit, I don't remember the word you used, but when like a lot of pressure, I think is what you said. Right. And so this reminds me a little bit of our Enneagram conversation long ago. Yeah. And just that we're all different. We all bring different skills to this role. And yet for some reason we're expected to like do all of them, right? All the aspects of this job. And so one thing is like, is to know your people in your community. Yeah. And so like, let's say you're not into researching. Let's say you do not have the guts to like call and make that patient relations phone call, but you know it needs to happen. Like, who are the people in your circles? Do you have anyone that you can say, can you just read all these articles for me and tell me what you find? Can you write the letter to patient relations and then I'll proofread it and sign my name?
Yes.
You know, like, so that to kind of give us the grace to know we don't have to be good at all of it.
Yeah.
And to recognize what are the things that we're maybe not so good at and that we're not comfortable with, that we can delegate to someone else, either professionally or personally, right? So some patients have like a social worker or a nurse coordinator. And so maybe it's one of those people that you can go to. Because I want to acknowledge the energy that any of this takes.
Yep.
I mean, even so, anybody who follows me on social media saw that a few weeks ago, one of Sean's nurse coordinators made a very inappropriate joke. He called. I had been waiting and waiting. This is during the lab thing. I'd been waiting for this phone call to see, like, what are we dealing with here? He said, "How you doing?" I said, "Oh, I'm digging in the dirt." And he said, "I hope," what did he say? He said, I certainly hope you're not digging a hole for Sean. What? So since then, people have been like, you need to call patient relations. You need to get him fired. You need to sit down with him. You need to. And I get that. And also I'm like, you know what? I only have so much energy. And so it's things like that, right? Is that a kind of thing that, like, okay, if that needs to be handled, could I delegate that to someone else to just say, like, nope, can't.
Yeah.
Right.
Can I hop in a second?
Please. Yes.
I think what's great about what you've just described with that delegation is there are people who don't have the the skill set that we initially jump to as far as like supporting a caregiver. Like, they're not the people who are going to drop off a meal.
Sure.
They're not like geared for kind of like stopping by for a visit or like mowing your lawn or something. But like, there are people who are super into like reading and researching.
Yes.
Like, and that's not maybe an obvious thing that we see as a way to help, but it's a way for supporters who feel like, well, I don't know what I can help. What I can do. It opens the door for a little bit more ways to be a part of the whole situation.
Exactly. For sure. So I think that, one of these buckets is the advocating within the medical system.
Right.
There's also the system as far as advocating with insurance companies and the medical bills and all of that, which is just like a whole other thing that we know that caregivers spend so much time on.
Yeah.
But I think another bucket that I think people forget about when we think about advocating on behalf of our person is with our family and friends. And I think that can be really dicey.
Yeah.
So some examples of this might be, let's say it's holiday season and you say, like, we're going to come to the party, but we would ask that people wear masks.
Right.
Or we're going to go to the event, but we are going to come late and leave early. Even yesterday, Sean and I attended an event and I knew that there was like a heat advisory in Minnesota.
Yeah.
And it was like a memorial service.
Yeah.
Or typically we would have just like passed. But I reached out to the people beforehand and I said, if you could just give me some information about if it's going to be inside or outside or air conditioned, just so that I can prepare and make sure that he is, healthy and well. Right. So I think that it can be that kind of thing. It can also be like somebody showing up at your doorstep, hacking and coughing and being like, "Hi, I'm here for a visit." Right. And you being like, "Nope."
Yeah. Right.
Or maybe it's people who are bringing in toxic positivity, or maybe it's, they're bringing in stuff like that. And so I think that that's an extra bucket and that can feel even more, because it's less of a like faceless, nameless thing. It's like, these are people, right? When I posted that thing about the terrible nurse coordinator, a lot of people shared stories, and some were with medical professionals, but a lot were with family and friends who said terrible things to them.
Right.
And then they were like, and so obviously they're not my friend anymore, And so sometimes it's like, we need to act as the barrier, because maybe they're saying terrible things about our person or about our situation, and we need to advocate. Right.
Yeah.
So do you have any thoughts about that piece, about this bucket of advocating on behalf of our family and friends?
Going into this episode, I hadn't really thought about that piece a lot, but certainly that's a big part, whether that's like, you've kind of given some examples around kind of acting as a gatekeeper, or like getting that additional information for attending something, or making clear that, we have certain parameters that we have to be able to attend, things like that. But there's also like a sort of educational piece with the people too, in a way that a way to be able to advocate for your person to your friends and family is having them have a little more knowledge of the whole situation, so that they can have more understanding.
Yeah.
And so there's sort of this teaching piece too, and navigating when is the right time to like do some education, and when is it just like not, when do you just need to shut something down and move on? But it's tricky because like for the like family especially, but friends too, like they're in your life. Like you are interacting with them on and on, like they're part of your circle. And whereas like a doctor, you only see them once every so often.
Sure.
Or it's like, this doctor is not taking things seriously. Like, we need to get a different doctor. Like, we need to switch to, and like, there's less of a ingrained as part of your life and constant interaction.
Sure.
And so like, certainly that's a place where putting in that effort to feel like those people can be the best support that they can, and doing that educational work as a caregiver, certainly that's exhausting, or can be exhausting, depending on what the people around you are like. But that can make a big difference in, I think that's the kind of work that will pay off in you resulting in feeling and receiving better support, hopefully.
Right. Well, because it's about how much energy do you want to invest in this relationship?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Right. And I think the flip side of that is how hurtful it can feel.
Right.
If there's a doctor and they say something really dumb and you've met them once, you're like, I mean, that can hurt and all of that. But it's not like if it's your best friend or your cousin or your sister and they say something, like, well, at least it's not the bad kind of cancer or whatever, the hurtful thing they might say. Right. Because then it's like, oh, like at the time that I need you the most, friend, cousin, sister, you're going to say that, And so, so there's that piece of, with the doctors, we might want to put in more time and effort to heal that or to mend that so that we can get the care we need.
Yeah.
With these like personal relationships, it's like, well, how important is that relationship to you? Do you want to like mend that and work on that? Or is it just sort of like, nope, we're not coming back from this. We're not. Like, I will never forget that you just said that thing. We're done.
Yeah.
So back to what you said about like educating our people. And so in some ways that kind of can preempt maybe something, right? So back in the day when Sean had his bone marrow transplant, he for a while couldn't be around kids or people who had just had live vaccines.
Oh, okay.
Because he still didn't have an immune system. And so like the live vaccines, like he could have gotten something. And so, instead of us just being like, no kids, can't see your kids, we just put on our like lots of helping hands page or wherever, here's what's happening. At this moment, he doesn't have an immune system. Because of that, he isn't allowed to be around people who have just had vaccines because if he was, this might happen.
Right.
So if you or your kids have recently had vaccines, please don't hang out with us for the next month or whatever. And so, I mean, just that little bit so that they're not just like, oh, they don't like children or whatever it is. Right. So sometimes just giving a little bit of information, even though with the thing yesterday, I mean, the people that I asked the question of know Sean well enough, I didn't have to explain, but somebody might've been like, why are you being so picky about air conditioning? And so I could have just said, Sean is really sensitive to heat these days and with his health, And so I'm just wondering if you could give me some information so that I can better prepare. Right. And so I think just giving that little bit of explanation or history. So it's not just, we're not just being high maintenance.
Right.
Like we have to think about these things to get through in the world,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think this is another area where it's good to have a conversation with the person you're caring for as far as what they want your role to be. In advocating for them amongst friends and family.
Sure.
Because I can see if we just jump to that feeling like maybe they feel like, well, I can handle, I want to handle this myself or like things like that. And so again, having good communication with the person you're caring for, knowing kind of whose role it is to step in for what. And I think is helpful too, just to keep that relationship between the caregiver and the caree going as smoothly as possible. I think communication there is always really important.
Yeah. Because I think the other one is sort of in the community. So I think about things like being like, so Sean, is 45. And so, and it's not obvious when you look at him that he is not well. And so it's hard on things like if we're on like the tram at the airport and there's like a seat that has the accessibility symbol on it, and I'm like, you need to sit down. And he's like, well, do I need to sit down? Don't look like I need to sit down. I look like I'm a jerk if I'm sitting down. Right. Or even like at Baileen's graduation, he was like with my parents who went to the accessible section, but then he didn't have like an accessible ticket.
Oh.
And so he ended up walking like 1 billion miles instead of just like, boop, doing this thing. Cause he's like, well, I didn't have the right ticket. And I thought they would think didn't look like it. And I was just like, oh my gosh. And if I had been there with him, I would have been like, this guy needs to go. Yeah. Right. And so I think there's those kind of moments too with community and community spaces where we end up maybe advocating for like, he needs to sit, or can you stop smoking, or can you know what I mean? Like with sort of not with people that we don't know. Yeah. But just in the world, Yeah. I think the final bucket that isn't thought about often enough. Yeah. Is advocating on behalf of our person with our person. So it's some interesting prepositions I just used. So let me explain. Yeah. That sometimes I feel like we caregivers need to stand up for our person to our person. So let's say you have an aging parent and they're still driving. Yeah. And maybe you're seeing that they shouldn't. And you might have to advocate for their safety. Yeah. But to them by having that hard conversation about taking away the keys. Things like our trip that we were going to go on. I mean, fortunately in that situation, Sean was like, I can't. Right. But if he hadn't, I would have maybe had to have the hard conversation with him to like advocate for him, but to him. Does that make sense? Yeah. Yeah. Is that an angle you had ever considered?
Not specifically under this advocacy umbrella, but certainly something a concept that rings true, that is familiar. I think that if you're caring for someone who has limited energy, being able to be like, hey, I see you're spending a lot of time on this energy here. Is that where you want to be spending your energy? That's gonna or do you want to save your energy for something else? And just kind of like, because I don't know, it's not always obvious to yourself when you're caught up in something like, oh, this is going to mean this. Right. And so being able to be kind of that second set of eyes and kind of that step back and seeing a bigger perspective, I think can be helpful. So yeah, I think your example about an aging parent driving is a great one. But yeah, it's you have a little bit more of an objective lens and ability to kind of look back and see a whole picture maybe than the person who's in it and just like experiencing the pain, experiencing the illness. And that can cause like maybe like brain fog or like less ability to like really think through that. So like having someone who is slightly outside who can help manage all that can be really helpful. Yeah.
Well, and I think as a caregiver, I am hyper vigilant. So I feel like in every situation, I'm like, just watching, right? Looking for just any of the things. Right. And I think that Sean is more just like trying to be in the moment and survive the moment. Yeah. So whereas I'm like, danger everywhere, which is exhausting, by the way. He's just sort of trying to like be there. Plus he's an Enneagram 9, which means he's a peacemaker, which means it's going to have to be really bad for him to like complain. Right. And so then I feel like there's often moments. So again, we were at this event yesterday and ended up being outside, and then it was like pouring down rain. And then I was like, you need a chair. We're going to go sit. There aren't that many chairs, but you're going to get one. So we're going to sit there. And then it was raining and I could see the thing was like dripping on him and he didn't realize, you know what I mean? All these things. And so there's just things like that I think, because also he just loves being around people and all the things. And so sometimes I have to be the one to be like, I think it's time for us to go. Yeah. Or I think it's time for, or I think we can't go to that thing today, maybe tomorrow. Or we, you need to sit down. Or even at like Badeline's graduation party, same. I kept being like, sit in the chair. Sit in a chair. People can come to you. Sit down. And so I want to stop and acknowledge that, and we've said this before, but I think it's worth repeating. You and I are both so fortunate to have beautiful relationships with our people in which we can have hard conversations and say, I think you need to sit in this chair, or do you know what I mean? Like, and I know that not everyone who's caring for someone certainly has a positive, loving relationship. And that can make this a billion times harder. So whether that's just because the relationship has always been hard, maybe there's a brain injury or cognitive changes, there's a lot of reasons that relationships can be hard. But I know that you and I are like, well, we'll just say to our person, what if you looks like you're spending too much energy on that? I mean, that can go well in your house. That could go real rad in some other people's houses. So I just want to acknowledge that.
That's good.
That this advocating with against your person can be really tricky in a lot of households. So
yeah, for sure. Yeah. I want to just jump back to where we started with medical stuff a minute, because I had a couple things that I wanted to touch on that I didn't, and I want to just make sure I talk about them.
Please. Thank you.
So,
way to advocate for yourself.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So a couple practical sort of things is, one, if you have a lot of questions, like, you can ask for a longer appointment. Certainly that's something we've done where it's like, we've got a lot we want to talk about. Like, hey, can we get a 30-minute appointment instead of a 15-minute appointment?
Interesting. I'd never thought about that.
Yeah. So that you feel like you have the time to go through, if you're feeling like things have been rushed and you want to really cover some stuff, like, you can put more time on the doctor's calendar.
Okay. Good to know.
That's something you can do. And I don't know if every place is really how well that's received everywhere, but we've certainly had good luck with that as a thing. Another thing is like when Sarah had her surgery, there was a procedure she needed going up to it, and it was going to be, we called the schedule, and it was going to be, they weren't going to be able to do it in time. And she's like, well, I will take any provider that can do this.
Yeah.
Like, mention that if it's something where you need to get in sooner, like, they're just looking at your doctor and their calendar, like, okay, can we open it up a little bit? Is there someone else?
Yep.
Whether maybe that's a nurse practitioner instead of a doctor, but that's still, great.
Yeah.
To open that up wider.
Yeah. Or even like other clinics. Like, we're fortunate. We're in a big metropolitan area. And so we're like, yes, we usually go to the one at the university, but we're willing to drive to the suburbs.
Yeah.
And so to say that, like, it doesn't have to be at this clinic.
Right.
Also opens up the books. Or the thing that I said earlier about, like, can you put me on the wait list?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then one other thing is we had an experience where Sarah went in to get a procedure done. It was back when she had her headaches were like just the most intense thing that she was dealing with. And it was like a long shot that this procedure was going to do anything, but like working with her headache specialist is like, let's do it. Let's try and see just to make sure that it's not this, we can cross that off the list and know that we can move on from there. And the doctor that was supposed to do the procedure came into the room and was like, no, you don't need this. Like, what are we doing here? Like, you don't want this. And it was just really awkward and uncomfortable. And like, it didn't feel great at all. And I think what helped me is being able to defer to, well, her doctor had asked for this, and so we would like this done because her doctor asked for this.
Yep.
And like, that seemed to be better received, I think.
Yeah. Yep.
That it, it's not, I don't know, it's deferring to someone else. That's easier also to advocate, having an external reason that, like, no, it's not just because I think this should be done.
Right.
But like, I don't know, having something else to point to was helpful in that situation.
For sure. Yeah. You kind of have to figure out what's the card you have to play.
Well, yeah. And something similar to when you were talking about personality types, like, granted, if this is the first time you're interacting with a medical professional, like, you don't have this isn't really going to work out. But like, as you encounter a doctor over a period of time, like, figuring out what you need to do to navigate that conversation. Yep. To like get the result you want, like whether you need to present stuff so that they can come up with the idea. Like, some people would be very dismissive to like, well, you're not the doctor. Like, I'm not going to listen to your idea. You know what I mean?
Right.
That, like, understanding other people's personality types.
Yes.
And how to have that interaction. Now that's a lot of work.
Right.
But just kind of thinking a little bit bigger maybe in how to manage those situations. I don't know.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that again, to go back to like the thing to take from this is that we are the customers.
Yes.
And so we have fired doctors in the past. We have been like, absolutely not. We are not going back to that person, and that's okay. And I know, I remember when we had the conversation about therapists, we talked about like, people are like afraid to like get rid of their therapist. What if she's, or whatever, hurt her feelings, right? These people are fine.
Yeah.
And So don't waste time seeing a provider where you feel like you're not getting what you need. Now, I know, again, like I'm fortunate because I'm in a large metropolitan area, so there are a lot of options.
Yeah.
But even this, like, it was like a Fanconi specialist that we fired, but we were like, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Like, he's being so unprofessional that like the fact that he is an FA specialist doesn't matter.
Right.
You know, so just to know that, like, whether it's a person in, like, if you're in the hospital and the nurse is not treating you well or whatever it is, you can go to the head charge nurse and just say, like, I need a nurse right now.
Yeah.
Or it's a provider and you're like, you know what, we want to be on somebody else's caseload, you know, like you get to say those things.
Right.
And that every system should have a patient relations in place so that you can, like, file an official complaint or do those kinds of things as well. Or again, is this the kind of thing that you don't have energy for, but you can say to a person who's like really good at this kind of thing in your life, like, hey, can you help me by doing this thing? Right. Yeah.
Something else that just popped into my head as far as the medical stuff in appointments, if you feel like you get shut down during the appointment or they didn't have time for all your questions, like, use the patient portal, use MyChart.
Yes. Yes.
You know, send a message after the appointment, like, hey, I know we talked about this. I really had questions about this, this, and this.
Yep.
And then hopefully they can respond to that, or maybe that'll prompt another appointment to talk about those things specifically. But like, really use that as a way to communicate and get more information and get more answers. Like, that's a tool that is there for you. It's not, don't feel like, oh, I can't reach out to them, like they're so busy. Like,
this is their job. Literally,
this is their job. Exactly. Yep.
We have a listener who has said many times that she preemptively, before the appointment, will send her questions in the portal.
Oh, interesting.
So she'll say, hey, doc, I know we're going to see you on Thursday. Here's the latest stats. Here's the questions. Here's what we want to have covered in the appointment.
That's kind of genius.
I know, right? And so now, whether or not, like, he looks at it or not, right? But like, she sort of lays out the framework before the appointment, which I was like, ooh, now again, that takes a lot of work.
Yeah.
But it's sort of one of those things that if you put in the work for that, then maybe the appointment's going to go a lot better.
Well, it ties into that preparation piece where I think going into appointments prepared with an agenda, with questions you want answered, with like, this is the outcome that we're looking for, can help steer those interactions to hopefully get better care.
Yep. And if you're listening to this and you're just exhausted, as most of you are, right? Because we are, you know, to think about, okay, is there, what can you do beforehand? If maybe you are more in your thinking brain, or you do have a burst of energy, or what can someone help you with beforehand? Can you friend draft a list of questions or whatever?
Right.
Can you bring somebody with you who can help boost you up, or who can be the person to be like, actually, you know, to sort of, so that you don't have to feel like you're doing this all on your own.
Yeah.
You know, how can you sort of shore up your defenses a little bit with your team? Yeah.
That's good.
So good segue into the team and the supporters. So supporters, if you're listening, I think number one is just I hope that you're hearing what a big part of a caregiver's life this advocacy stuff is.
Right.
Because again, this is not acknowledged. Like, nobody thinks of this part. They think of like wound care and appointments and whatever, but I don't think they think about this piece. And so, first of all, just the acknowledging piece. Yeah. Supporters, for you to be like, I imagine that at that appointment, you had to stand up, or like, if you see something like, oh, you got him to sit down, or you got that chair, you had to leave early. Like, I imagine that was a lot, you know, kind of thing. Other things that you can do is, even I posted about this recently too, that we went to a graduation party where a friend of ours sort of without me saying anything, she was the one that was like, Sean, here is a chair. Sean, here is a water. Hey, here, I'm going to cover the sun for you. You know, like, oh, and it just felt like this huge weight off my shoulder that she was doing that vigilant stuff that I would typically be doing. She was advocating on his behalf, and I didn't have to. Yeah. So those kinds of things, or even like, hey, we're going to have, like, when I visited you a couple of years ago, you said, we're going to have a quiet space in our house that Sean can rest beforehand. Right. So I didn't have to advocate where I would have maybe had to say, could you have a space set up? Right. What are other things that you think that supporters can be doing to be helpful?
Yeah, something that, I mean, it came to mind when we were talking about the research piece, and like maybe there's someone in your life who can help you with research. Like certainly, yes, that's a helpful thing. I think also like probably best to wait until you're asked to help in that area, or offer the help without doing the research. Like don't say, well, I'm just going to do a bunch of research on this. And then like, here, caregiver, here's a bunch of stuff I researched. Like,
right.
That's not the way to approach that, certainly.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think also just being there to listen. Like if a caregiver has a frustrating appointment with their person, like being able to listen and just listen without being like, well, you should have done this, you should have done this, you should have done this. Like if they ask you, hey, what do you think I could have done differently? Certainly, you can speak to that. But I think this is an area where their venting can be important with having poor interactions and needing to do extra work and needing to have an ear to just like offload the frustrations of that, because we don't always want to do that to our person. Like, yes, certainly there is some mutual venting that can happen when you come out of a bad appointment and you're both just like, oof, that was terrible.
Right.
But maybe, after an appointment, they've used all the energy they have and they're not available for that. And it's healthy and good to like verbalize that frustration. Yeah. I think. And so having a listening ear is great.
Yep. Yeah. I think so. I think the acknowledgement piece, the offering to listen, the saying things like, I don't know if this would be helpful, but I really like researching, or I actually really like, writing. I work for an HR department and I really like writing letters about, whatever, like these are things, or like, I know you have an appointment coming up. Would it be helpful to like brainstorm with me some questions that you might have, or things like that? Yeah, for sure.
That's great.
A big other thing that we didn't cover is just sort of advocacy as far as like legislative stuff.
Right.
And so that's just another thing that there's actually some exciting stuff going on potentially in the legislature for caregivers. And part of it is just, if that's something that you're into, supporter, just to learn about that. To learn about that and to say, hey, I was just reading about this thing and the help for caregivers, and, and if you're into that, can you get involved, supporter, on behalf of the caregiver? Because we don't have the time and energy,
That would be a really meaningful thing to hear as a caregiver. Like, hey, I know you're busy. I know you don't have time for this, but I have time and I'm spending time helping move forward this greater change. And if that sounds like something you want to help with, I think Caring Across Generations is a great organization to research, get involved with, or learn about, and kind of see what's being done in that area.
Absolutely. Yes, for sure. But yeah, like if someone said, oh, I took time the other day to read this bill that's coming down and to write to my senator about it, I would be like, oh, really? Yeah. So that's just another bucket of advocacy. So yeah.
Good.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Sounds good. Good talk.
Yeah. This was a good one.
Yeah. They're all good ones, right? Well, yes. Well, I hope that the trend continues of quiet, calm times in both of our houses.
For sure.
Let's keep that up, shall we?
Okay. Sounds great.
Okay. All right. Talk to you later.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye. You've been listening to In Sickness. Find us online at insickness.care or on Instagram at insicknesspodcast. You can send your questions and comments to insicknesspodcast@gmail.com. If you enjoyed the show, please share it with a friend or fellow caregiver, or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Thanks for listening, and take care.